Did medieval hearts break the way ours do, only with more swords and less tutting? Did a secret kiss or a forbidden marriage ignite wars that lasted generations, drowning entire regions in blood and tears? From the 12th to the 15th centuries, love, or the messy business of marriage and desire, often served as the spark for epic family feuds that shaped kingdoms and destroyed lives. Number 5. The Percy and Neville conflict, a northern storm. The chill winds sweeping across the wild, untamed landscapes of northern England carried more than just the scent of heather and damp earth during the 15th century. They often whispered tales of bitter rivalry, of ancient grudges, and of the fierce, unyielding struggle for dominance between two of England's most powerful families, the Percys and the Nevilles. This was not a simple squabble. It was a sprawling, multi-generational conflict, a private war that often mirrored and exacerbated the wider political turmoil of the realm, particularly the Wars of the Roses. While not always born of a single romantic misstep, the very fabric of their power, their alliances, and their deeply held honor was intertwined with the strategic marriages and the perceived slights that arose from them. The Percy family, traditionally the Earls of Northumberland, held immense sway in the far north. Their ancestry stretched back to Norman conquerors, and their lands, castles, and retinues were vast. They were the wardens of the Scottish marches, a duty that gave them military experience and a martial reputation. Their grip on the region seemed almost unshakable. Then came the Nevilles. This family, initially lesser in status, had risen meteorically through shrewd political maneuvering, impressive military service, and crucially, a series of advantageous marriages. Ralph Neville, the first Earl of Westmoreland, had been a master of this game, marrying Joan Beaufort, a legitimized daughter of John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster. This connection to the royal family elevated the Nevilles significantly, placing them in a position to challenge the established Percy supremacy. The stage was set for a clash of titans, and it was in the realm of marriage and succession that their ambitions frequently collided, turning potential alliances into sources of burning animosity. The North was a land of opportunities and dangers, where control over vast tracts of land, strategic castles, and the loyalty of the local gentry meant everything. Marriages were the ultimate tools for consolidating such power, for forging unbreakable bonds, or for creating perilous fault lines. One particular flashpoint emerged around the mid-15th century, a time when England was teetering on the brink of civil war. The Percy family, specifically Thomas Percy, Lord Egremont, and Richard Percy, sons of the second Earl of Northumberland, harbored a deep resentment towards the rising power of the Nevilles. They saw the Nevilles as upstarts, encroaching on their traditional territories and privileges. The Nevilles, on the other hand, particularly Richard Neville, the future Earl of Salisbury, and later Kingmaker, were determined to secure their hard-won position. The immediate sparks often flew over seemingly minor matters of land ownership or jurisdiction, but these were magnified by the intense personal animosity and the competitive nature of their marriage strategies. The Nevilles, through the foresight of Ralph, Earl of Westmoreland, had established a formidable network of kinship. His daughter, Cecily Neville, married Richard, Duke of York, a potential claimant to the throne. His son, Richard Neville, the future Earl of Salisbury, married Alice Montague, acquiring the vast Montague estates and earldom. These connections placed the Nevilles directly in the heart of royal politics, while the Percys were often seen as more insular, focused on their northern domain. The perception of slights and the constant jostling for social and political supremacy could turn a simple betrothal into a major incident. Imagine a situation where a Neville child was offered a match to a desirable local heiress, a match that a Percy family member had also sought. Such events, though not explicitly recorded as the sole origin of the feud, were undoubtedly contributors to the simmering tension. The honor of the family and the prospects of its future generations were inextricably linked to these marital arrangements. A rejection, a perceived snub, or a rival proposal could be seen as an insult to the family's standing, demanding a response. By the 1450s, the Percy-Neville feud had intensified dramatically. It was no longer a polite disagreement over precedence. It was a brutal, armed conflict. The animosity between the two families spilled over into open violence, with skirmishes and raids becoming commonplace. On a daily level, retainers of one house might ambush those of the other. Lands were ravaged, livestock stolen, and individual lives were lost in the name of family honor. The Neville family had secured a key alliance through marriage with the powerful Earl of Northumberland's cousin, a daughter of Eleanor Neville, linking the Nevilles to the legitimate Percy lineage. However, this did not soothe the animosity. It sometimes exacerbated, as the younger Percys, feeling mortalized, resisted the Neville ascent with greater ferocity. Thomas Percy, Lord Egremont, epitomized this aggressive resistance. He felt deeply that the Nevilles had usurped his family's rightful place. A significant event, a direct escalation of their hatred, occurred in August 1453. Thomas Percy, Lord Egremont, and his brother Richard Percy orchestrated an ambush against the Nevilles near Heworth Moor. Richard Neville, Earl of Salisbury, was returning from his daughter Eleanor's wedding to Thomas Stanley, a strategically important match that further solidified Neville power in the northwest. This marriage was a classic Neville move, consolidating power through alliance. Percy attack was a clear attempt to disrupt and punish the Nevilles for their continued success and influence. The skirmish was fierce, a violent expression of deep-seated personal and familial hatred, fueled by years of perceived injustices and the raw competition for power. While Salisbury and his new son-in-law managed to escape, the incident was a stark demonstration of the depths of their animosity. It showed that even a joyous family occasion, a wedding, could become a battleground. This violence escalated further. The Percys continued to raid Neville lands, attacking their tenants and their property. They besieged the Neville castle of Topcliffe. Crown, weakened and fragmented by the mental illness of King Henry VI, proved unable to enforce peace effectively. The feud became a defining feature of life in the north, disrupting trade, justice, and the very peace of the king. The family's loyalties eventually aligned with the factions in the Wars of the Roses, adding another layer of complexity to their personal feud. The Nevilles, particularly Richard Neville, Earl of Salisbury, and his formidable son, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, the Kingmaker, threw their weight behind the House of York. Their close family ties to Richard, Duke of York, through Cecily Neville, made this alignment almost inevitable. Percys, on the other hand, remained staunch supporters of the Lancastrian dynasty, loyal to King Henry VI. This meant that their private war became a national one, fought on a grander scale. The Battle of St. Albans in 1455 marked a pivotal moment. It was one of the first major battles of the Wars of the Roses, and here the Percy and Neville feud played out on a national stage. Thomas Percy, Lord Egremont, and his father, the second Earl of Northumberland, fought for the Lancastrian cause, their hatred of the Nevilles fueling their resolve. On the opposing side, fighting for York, were the Nevilles, Richard Neville, Earl of Salisbury, and his son Warwick. The battle resulted in a decisive Yorkist victory. Both the second Earl of Northumberland and his son, Thomas Percy, Lord Egremont, were killed in the fighting. This loss was devastating for the Percy family, but it also further entrenched the feud. The new Earl of Northumberland, Henry Percy, had inherited not only his father's title, but also the burning desire for revenge against the Nevilles. The cycle of violence continued. The hatred between the families was now a blood feud, sealed by deaths on the battlefield. The Percy loyalists sought to avenge their fallen kinsmen, while the Nevilles, now ascendant with the Yorkist cause, pressed their advantage. Conflict ebbed and flowed with the larger tides of the Wars of the Roses. At the Battle of Towton in 1461, one of the largest and bloodiest battles on English soil, the third Earl of Northumberland, Henry Percy, once again fought for the Lancastrians. He too was killed, alongside many other prominent Lancastrians. His death seemed to mark the end of Percy power, at least temporarily. With the Yorkists triumphant and Edward IV on the throne, the Nevilles reached the zenith of their influence. Warwick, the kingmaker, was the most powerful man in England after the king. Percy lands and titles were confiscated and given to Neville allies, including Sir John Neville, Warwick's brother, who was made Earl of Northumberland. This was the ultimate humiliation for the Percys, and a testament to the deep-seated hatred that drove their feud. The idea that a Neville would hold the Percy ancestral title was an insult of the highest order. Yet, the story did not end there. The depths of medieval loyalty and the resilience of noble families were profound. Percy's cause was kept alive by the remaining family members and their loyal followers, many of whom felt deeply wronged by the confiscation of their lord's lands and titles. Percys, despite their losses, still commanded significant local support in the north. After a few years, Edward IV, in a move of political pragmatism, realized the danger of a perpetually disaffected Percy faction. In 1470, the heir to the Percy estates, Henry Percy, who had been imprisoned in the Tower of London, was released. He was eventually restored to his family's titles and lands, an act that caused great resentment among the Nevilles and their allies. The Earl of Northumberland title was taken from John Neville and given back to Henry Percy. This restoration was a clear attempt by the king to stabilize the north and to balance the power of the Nevilles, who by this point had become too powerful and independent for Edward's comfort. It highlighted how personal feuds could be manipulated by the crown for political gain, and how a family's fortunes, intrinsically linked to their prestige and marital prospects, could rise and fall with the changing political winds. The Percy-Neville feud had not truly ended with the Restoration. Though direct violence subsided after the Wars of the Roses concluded and many of the key players were dead, the deep scars remained. Generations had grown up knowing the Nevilles as their enemies and the Percys as their rightful lords. The memory of lost kinsmen, confiscated lands, and dishonored family names lingered a constant undercurrent in the social fabric of the North. The importance of marriage in this feud cannot be understated, even if no single love affair sparked it like a Romeo and Juliet narrative. Marriages were the currency of power, the means by which families expanded their influence, secured their borders, and cemented their alliances. When a desirable match was made by an enemy, it was a threat. When one family gained control of a wardship that promised a lucrative marriage, it was a victory over the other. Perceived loss of a potential bride or groom, or the strategic acquisition of one by the opposing family, could fuel resentment just as intensely as a skirmish over land. Percy and Neville feud was a chilling demonstration of how deeply personal animosity, fueled by ambition and the strategic manipulation of familial bonds and marital prospects, could plunge a powerful region into decades of intermittent warfare. It was a story not just of grand battles and political maneuvers, but of individual hatreds passed down through generations, of lives shaped and ultimately ended by the relentless, all-consuming drive for dominance, a drive often expressed through the very choices of who married whom and who was denied such a match. The North was their battleground, and the prizes were power, prestige, and the elusive honor of being the paramount family, a quest that knew no end for decades. Number 4. The Buondelmonte and Amidei feud, Florence's bloody genesis. The year was 1215, and the city of Florence was a vibrant, bustling hub of trade, art, and burgeoning political power. But beneath its grand facades and bustling markets, a dangerous tension simmered. The city was divided, not by walls, but by an invisible yet palpable line between powerful noble families. These families, with their towers that pierced the sky and their retinues of armed followers, vied constantly for influence, wealth, and honor. Florence was a cauldron of ambition, and it was here in the heart of its winding streets that a single act of romantic rebellion, a broken engagement, ignited a feud so fierce it would rip the city apart for over a century, giving birth to the infamous Guelph and Ghibelline factions. The feud's origin story is etched into the very chronicles of Florence, a stark reminder of how personal honor and perceived betrayal could shatter civic peace. It revolved around a young nobleman named Buondelmonte de Buondelmonte. His family, the Buondelmonte, were a prominent and powerful clan, deeply entrenched in Florentine politics and society. They were rivals to other old established families, including the Amadei and the Donati. Buondelmonte, described as a handsome and spirited young man, had been betrothed to a young woman from the Amadei family. This was a common practice among medieval noble families. Marriages were rarely about love. They were strategic alliances, treaties signed in blood and lineage. This particular engagement was meant to heal an old, festering wound, to mend a long-standing quarrel between the Buondelmonte and the Amadei. It was an arranged marriage, a peace offering intended to secure the fragile balance of power in the city. The families had been in dispute over a minor incident involving a Buondelmonte attacking an Amadei, and the marriage was proposed as a form of reconciliation, a binding agreement to prevent further bloodshed. The stage was set for harmony, or so it seemed. The preparations for the wedding were underway, and the citizens of Florence might have breathed a sigh of relief, hoping for a period of peace. But then, a fateful encounter changed everything. As Buondelmonte rode through the city streets, a woman caught his eye. She was exceptionally beautiful, a member of the Donati family, a rival clan to the Amadei. Her name was Gismunda. Some accounts suggest it was her mother, Donna Uldruda de Donati, who, seeing the handsome Buondelmonte, called out to him, perhaps even scornfully remarking on his choice of bride from the Amadei, "What are you doing, taking a wife of such lowly worth?" "I have a daughter who is more beautiful, more worthy of you," she might have said, or something similar, planting a seed of doubt and desire in the young man's mind. Whether it was the mother's persuasive words or Buondelmonte's own immediate attraction to Gismunda, the effect was immediate and catastrophic. In a stunning act of defiance and impulsive desire, Buondelmonte broke off his engagement to the Amadei bride. He declared his intention to marry Gismunda de Donati instead. In the world of medieval Florence, this was not just a social faux pas. It was an unforgivable insult, a profound breach of honor, and a direct challenge to the Amadei family. A broken betrothal, especially one intended to seal a peace, was a declaration of war. It was an act of personal betrayal magnified into a public dishonor. The Amadei family, their pride wounded beyond repair, were outraged. Their fury was shared by their allies, other powerful families like the Uberti and the Fifanti, who also felt insulted by Buondelmonte's actions. The Amadei family, led by their patriarch, decided that such an insult could not stand. Honor demanded blood. They convened a meeting with their allies, including the powerful Uberti family, at the Uberti Palace. Some accounts say they gathered at a dinner, debating the appropriate response. Mosca de Lamberti, a relative of the Amadei, delivered the chilling and infamous advice: "Cosa fatta capo ha." What is done has a head or more, colloquially. A finished thing has an outcome. This chilling phrase meant that the only way to truly settle the matter and restore their honor was to ensure Buondelmonte would never commit such an offense again. it meant his death. Others hesitated, perhaps fearing the consequences of such a violent act, but the majority, fueled by anger and a sense of profound dishonor, agreed Buondelmonte had to pay the ultimate price. On Easter morning, a day typically reserved for peace and solemnity, Buondelmonte de Buondelmonte, dressed in white and riding a white palfrey, was making his way across the Ponte Vecchio, the old bridge spanning the Arno River. He was heading to his new bride's house, blissfully unaware of the deadly plot against him. As he approached the statue of Mars at the head of the bridge, a group of armed men, hidden in the houses nearby, sprang out. They were members of the Amidae, the Uberti, the Fefanti, and their allies. Their leader was Sciatta degli Uberti. With swift and brutal efficiency, they dragged Buondelmonte from his horse and brutally murdered him at the base of the statue. His white clothes were stained red with blood. The murder of Buondelmonte sent shockwaves through Florence. It was not merely an act of revenge, it was a public execution, a brazen challenge that ripped away any pretense of civic order. The assassination solidified the division within Florence, creating two irreconcilable factions. The families who supported the Amidae and the Uberti, those who had participated in or condoned the murder, became known as the Ghibellines. They were generally the older, more aristocratic families, often allied with the Holy Roman Emperor, seeing in imperial power a way to curb the rising influence of the common people. The Buondelmonte family naturally sought vengeance for the murder of their kinsman. They rallied their own allies, particularly the Donati, the family of Buondelmonte's new bride, and other powerful families who were typically opposed to the Uberti and their circle. These families, generally more aligned with the papacy and often representing the rising merchant class, became known as the Guelphs. Thus, a single act of passionate impulse and the subsequent brutal revenge plunged Florence into an almost perpetual state of civil war. The Buondelmonte-Amidae feud became the origin point of the Guelph-Ghibelline conflict in Florence, a conflict that would last for over a century and define the city's political landscape. The ensuing years were marked by a relentless cycle of violence and counter-violence. The city became a battleground, its streets and squares frequently witnessing armed clashes between rival factions. Fortified towers, once symbols of family prestige, became defensive strongholds, their upper floors linked by bridges, so families could move between their properties without descending into the perilous streets below. Private armies roamed the city, loyal to their family banners, not to any centralized government. Families on both sides were exiled, their properties confiscated and often destroyed. When one faction gained the upper hand, they would banish their rivals, only for the exiled party to gather strength outside the city walls, seeking alliances and opportunities to return by force. The Ghibellines, for example, would periodically gain control, banishing the Guelphs. Then the Guelphs, often with papal support, would regroup and return, driving out the Ghibellines. This back and forth created a constant state of flux, fear, and instability. The feuds were not just about street brawls. They involved sophisticated political maneuvering, espionage, and complex alliances. Marriages continued to be critical, used to strengthen internal factional bonds, to unite families against a common enemy, or sometimes, in desperate attempts, to forge a fragile peace, which often failed spectacularly. Daughters and sons were pawns in a much larger, deadly game. The impact on Florence was profound. While the constant competition sometimes fueled innovation and the development of stronger civic institutions as factions learned to organize and govern, it also led to immense suffering, economic disruption, and loss of life. Artists, merchants, and thinkers lived under the shadow of perpetual conflict. Dante, Alighieri, the famous poet, writing much later, was a victim of this very conflict, exiled as a Guelph and forever marked by the divisions that tore his beloved city apart. He even placed Bondamonte in his Paradiso, lamenting the murder that sparked such a devastating feud. The hatred became so ingrained that identifying as a Guelph or a Ghibelline became a fundamental part of one's identity in Florence and other Italian city-states. It was a loyalty passed down through generations, often without a clear understanding of the original cause, simply an inherited animosity fueled by the memory of past wrongs. The broken promise of a young man and the swift, brutal revenge it provoked had laid the foundation for a century of urban warfare, forever changing the destiny of one of Europe's most influential cities. The statue of Mars on the Ponte Vecchio, where Buondelmonte fell, stood as a silent, bloody monument to a love affair gone wrong, a betrayal that cast a long, dark shadow over Florence for generations. Number 3. Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville, a crown and a secret vow. The year is 1464, and England is slowly emerging from the chaos of the early Wars of the Roses. The House of York, led by the handsome, mighty, and victorious young King Edward IV, has seized the throne from the Lancastrian King Henry VI. Edward is young, full of life, and undeniably popular. He is also unmarried, and his most powerful ally, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker, is actively negotiating a prodigious and politically advantageous marriage for him with a French princess, Bona of Savoy. This marriage would secure an alliance with France, bolster Edward's legitimacy on the international stage, and cement Warwick's immense power as the king's most trusted advisor. But Edward IV had other plans, secret plans that would send shockwaves through the English court and ultimately reignite the very civil war that Warwick had worked so hard to quell. These plans involved a woman named Elizabeth Woodville. Elizabeth was not a typical choice for a Queen of England. She was older than Edward, a widow with 2 young sons from her previous marriage to Sir John Grey of Groby, a Lancastrian knight who had died fighting for Henry VI at the Second Battle of St. Albans. She was not of royal blood, nor was she exceptionally wealthy. Her family, the Woodvilles, were gentry, respectable, but certainly not among the established upper nobility of England. In an era where royal marriages were purely about alliances, dowries, and dynastic security, Elizabeth was a controversial, almost unthinkable choice. Yet Edward, known for his charm and his enjoyment of female company, was captivated by Elizabeth. The exact circumstances of their meeting are debated, but one popular story suggests Elizabeth approached Edward directly to plead for the restoration of her late husband's lands for her sons. Whatever the initial encounter, a powerful attraction developed. Edward, notorious for his impulsiveness and his eye for beauty, fell deeply in love with her. Their romance blossomed in secret. Edward knew his trusted advisor, Warwick, would never approve of such a match. Warwick, having invested so much political capital in securing a French alliance through Bona of Savoy, would see Elizabeth as a grave insult, a direct challenge to his authority, and a foolish mistake that jeopardized the kingdom's stability. So, on May 1st, 1464, in a small private ceremony at Grafton Regis, the Woodville family home, Edward IV secretly married Elizabeth. Only Elizabeth's mother and a few servants were present to witness the clandestine vows. The king and his chosen queen had made their fateful decision, binding themselves to each other without the consent or even knowledge of the powerful men who governed the realm in his name. The revelation of this secret marriage was devastating. When Edward finally broke the news to his council in September 1464, the reaction was one of stunned disbelief, followed by fury. Warwick in particular was incandescent with rage. He had been publicly humiliated, his painstakingly negotiated alliance with France reduced to naught. He saw it as a personal betrayal, a king's willful disregard for his most loyal servant's counsel and for the good of the realm. The powerful Neville family, who had risked everything for Edward's cause, felt deeply insulted. The immediate consequence was a profound rift between Edward and Warwick, but the implications went far beyond a personal falling out. Edward, in his passionate desire to elevate his beloved Elizabeth, immediately began to promote her family, the Woodvilles, with astonishing speed and generosity. Elizabeth's 5 sisters, previously of modest standing, were married off to some of the most influential and wealthiest noblemen in England, displacing established families who had hoped for such advantageous matches. Her brothers received titles, lands, and prestigious offices, often at the expense of established Yorkist supporters, and especially those close to the Nevilles. This rapid rise of the Woodvilles caused immense resentment among the older nobility. They viewed the Woodvilles as upstarts, lacking the traditional lineage and wealth to command such positions. They also resented the perceived exclusion from the king's inner circle, a circle increasingly dominated by Elizabeth's relatives. Warwick, already angered by the marriage itself, found himself marginalized. His once unrivaled influence over the king was being systematically undermined by the Woodville family, who seemed to whisper constantly in the king's ear. The love match that had given Edward so much personal joy began to unravel the political stability of his reign. Warwick, seeing his power diminish and his advice ignored, grew increasingly alienated from the king he had helped put on the throne. This alienation turned into outright opposition. Warwick began to plot against Edward, forming alliances with disgruntled nobles and even with Edward's own brother George, Duke of Clarence, who felt similarly slighted and envious of the Woodvilles' meteoric ascent. Feud and Clarence orchestrated uprisings against Edward. In 1469, they defeated Edward's forces at the Battle of Edgecote Moor. This battle saw the deaths of Elizabeth Woodville's father, Earl Rivers, and her brother John Woodville, captured and executed without trial by Warwick's men. This was a direct, brutal blow against the Queen's family, a clear message of Warwick's hatred and contempt for their influence. Edward himself was briefly taken prisoner. This was a major turning point. Edward had managed to escape and regain control, but the damage was done. Personal animosity, born from a king's love and his defiance of political norms, had spilled into full-blown civil war once more. Warwick, now desperate, made the astonishing move of allying with his former enemy, the Lancastrian Queen Margaret of Anjou, wife of the deposed King Henry VI. He brokered a marriage alliance between Queen Margaret's son, Edward of Westminster, and his own daughter, Anne Neville. This was the ultimate betrayal of the Yorkist cause he had championed. In 1470, Warwick, with Lancastrian support, launched an invasion of England. Edward IV, caught off guard, was forced to flee the country, seeking refuge in Burgundy. King Henry VI was briefly restored to the throne, a puppet king under Warwick's control. The Woodvilles, now vulnerable, faced harsh retribution. Elizabeth Woodville, pregnant with her child, fled to Westminster Abbey for sanctuary, while her family scattered or went into hiding. Her mother, Shaqueta, Duchess of Bedford, was even accused of witchcraft by Warwick's supporters. A desperate attempt to discredit the Queen and her family, but Edward IV was not defeated. With support from Burgundy, he returned to England in 1471, determined to reclaim his throne. The decisive battles of Barnet and Tewkesbury followed. At Barnet, Warwick, the kingmaker, was killed, ending his tumultuous career and the personal feud that had driven him to such extremes. At Tewkesbury, the Lancastrian heir, Edward of Westminster, was killed, effectively extinguishing the direct Lancastrian line. Henry VI was found dead in the Tower of London shortly thereafter. Edward IV was back on the throne, his love for Elizabeth triumphant, but at immense cost. The secret marriage had unleashed a torrent of resentment, leading to further years of bloodshed, the deposition of a king, and the deaths of many powerful figures, including the very man who had helped him ascend to the crown. The Woodville family had certainly risen, but they had also paid a heavy price in lives lost and the enduring enmity of many segments of the nobility. Conflict, which started with Edward's personal choice, had transformed the political landscape of England. The love that defied convention had created a lasting fault line between the old guard nobility and the ambitious new men of the Woodville family. Even after Edward's death, the shadow of the Woodville influence loomed large, contributing to the instability that led to the reign of Richard III and the eventual rise of the Tudors. Elizabeth Woodville's secret vows had set in motion a chain of events that proved a pivotal bloody chapter in English history, demonstrating how even a king's personal affections could become the catalyst for national turmoil and devastating family feuds. Number 2. Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II, a royal family at war with itself. The mid-12th century was a time of immense change and conflict across Europe, and at its heart lay the powerful, sprawling Angevins, led by Henry II of England and his formidable wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Their union, initially one of passionate love and political brilliance, would ironically become the crucible for an epic, multi-generational family feud that reshaped the map of France and England and tested the very bonds of parenthood and loyalty. This was not a clash of rival noble houses in the traditional sense, but a devastating internal war within the ruling Plantagenet family, fueled by ambition, broken trust, and the fierce independence of a queen and her sons. Eleanor of Aquitaine was a woman unlike any other of her age. She was Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right, one of the wealthiest and most powerful territories in Europe. She had been Queen of France, married to Louis VII, a pious but somewhat ineffectual king. Their marriage produced 2 daughters, but no male heir, a source of constant tension. More critically, Eleanor found Louis stifling, and their personalities clashed dramatically. After 15 years, in 1152, they famously secured an annulment of their marriage on grounds of consanguinity, a distant blood relationship. Within 2 months of her annulment, Eleanor, still in her prime and immensely wealthy, made a truly astonishing decision. She married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou. Henry was Louis VII's direct vassal and rival, and a man 13 years her junior. He was also a dynamic, ambitious, and utterly ruthless leader. This was not a calculated political alliance arranged by a third party. It was a swift, decisive move orchestrated by Eleanor herself, possibly driven by a combination of ambition, pragmatism, and a powerful attraction to Henry's vigor and intelligence. For Henry, it meant immediate control of Aquitaine, instantly making him more powerful than his feudal lord, Louis VII. For Louis, it was an unimaginable insult, a double betrayal that ignited a deep and enduring hatred. The marriage of Eleanor and Henry created the vast Angevin Empire, stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees, encompassing England and a huge swathe of western France. They had 8 children together, 5 sons and 3 daughters, a fertile union that promised dynastic security. For a time, their partnership seemed unstoppable. Eleanor was Henry's close advisor, traveling with him, managing her own vast estates, and even participating in judicial proceedings. However, the powerful personalities that had initially drawn them together eventually clashed. Henry was a strong, controlling king, determined to assert his authority over all his lands and, crucially, over his fiercely independent sons. Eleanor, accustomed to ruling in her own right and possessing a formidable will, found Henry's increasing dominance suffocate. Rumors of Henry's numerous affairs, particularly with Rosamund Clifford, deepened the cracks in their marriage. Eleanor felt sidelined, her influence diminished, her love perhaps turned to resentment. The real family feud began to fester as their sons grew up. Henry, eager to secure his vast domains, began to distribute titles and territories to his sons. Henry the young king Richard, the future Lionheart, Geoffrey, and John. However, he often gave them titles without true power, or promised them lands that he was reluctant to fully relinquish. This created a terrible frustration for the ambitious young men. The eldest, Henry the young king, was crowned co-ruler of England, but he had no real authority or income. Richard was made Duke of Aquitaine, Eleanor's ancestral land, but Henry kept a tight grip on its administration. Eleanor, chafing under Henry's control and perhaps seeing in her sons a means to reclaim her own power and autonomy, began to openly encourage their resentment against their father. She sympathized with their desire for more power and actively fanned the flames of their discontent. In 1173, the simmering tensions exploded into open rebellion. Henry the young king, backed by his brothers Richard and Geoffrey, rose in revolt against their father. Crucially, they were supported by King Louis VII of France, who had never forgiven Eleanor or Henry for their marriage, and saw this as a golden opportunity to break the Angevin Empire. Eleanor herself was deeply involved in inciting this rebellion. She reportedly sent her younger sons to Louis's court, encouraging them to seek French support against their father. She even left Henry's court, attempting to join her rebellious sons in France, but she was intercepted by Henry's agents and captured. Henry II, furious at her betrayal, had her imprisoned. She spent the next 16 years, until Henry's death, largely under house arrest in various English castles. This was the core of the Plantagenet family feud. A father pitted against his sons, with the mother actively supporting the sons' rebellion against their father. The conflict was brutal and protracted. Castles were besieged, lands ravaged, and battles fought. Louis VII, and later his son Philip II, Augustus of France, consistently supported the rebellious Plantagenet princes, using them as pawns to weaken their dominant rival. Even while imprisoned, Eleanor's influence was felt. Her imprisonment itself became a source of sympathy for her sons, especially Richard, who felt deeply protective of his mother. When Henry the young king died in 1183, the cycle of rebellion continued. Richard and Geoffrey continued to challenge their father, sometimes individually, sometimes in concert. John, the youngest, and Henry's favorite, initially remained loyal, but would later prove to be Henry's ultimate betrayer. The final years of Henry II's reign were consumed by these family wars. He was constantly fighting his sons, who were often allied with the French king. In 1189, Richard, now his eldest surviving son, allied with Philip II Augustus of France against his aging father. They launched a decisive campaign, driving Henry from his lands. Humiliated and abandoned, Henry II was forced to accept a peace treaty that recognized Richard as his heir and paid homage to Philip. When Henry received a list of those who had joined Richard's rebellion, he found the name of his youngest and favorite son, John, at the top. The shock was too great. Henry II died 2 days later, murmuring, "Shame, shame on a conquered king." Richard I, the Lionheart, ascended to the throne upon his father's death. His first act as king was to release his mother, Eleanor, from her long imprisonment. Eleanor, now nearly 70 years old, immediately resumed her powerful role, acting as regent for Richard while he went on crusade. She was a shrewd politician and a formidable force, actively working to secure Richard's position and later the succession of her favorite son, John. The feud within the family continued in a different form. While Richard and John were not directly warring against each other for most of Richard's reign, the seeds of future conflict were sown. John, ever ambitious, tried to seize power while Richard was on crusade and imprisoned in Germany. Eleanor, however, remained loyal to Richard and actively worked to secure his ransom and prevent John's usurpation. When John finally became king after Richard's death, The legacy of internal family strife continued to plague the Plantagenet dynasty. John's own reign was marked by conflict with the French king Philip II Augustus, a continuation of the wider dynastic struggle, and with his own English barons, ultimately leading to Magna Carta. His reign was seen as a failure, a far cry from the glorious Angevin Empire forged by his parents. Plantagenet family feud, born from a king's desire for a powerful queen, and that queen's fierce independence and ambition, had profound and lasting consequences. It weakened the Angevin Empire, making it vulnerable to French expansion and contributing to the eventual loss of most of England's continental possessions. It illustrated how personal desires, marital discord, and parental favoritism could shatter the bonds of family and plunge a kingdom into generations of civil war. The story of Eleanor and Henry, and their warring sons, was a stark reminder that even the most powerful royal families were not immune to the devastating effects of internal divisions fueled by love, power, and deeply personal resentments. Number 1. The Montecchi and Cappellati, Verona's enduring grudge. The name Verona immediately conjures images of star-crossed lovers, secret balconies, and a tragic, all-consuming feud, while the specific tale of Romeo Montague and Juliet Capulet is a literary masterpiece, a fictional creation of Arthur Brooke and then William Shakespeare. It was built upon a very real, very bloody historical reality in medieval Italy. The city of Verona, like many other Italian city-states of the 13th and 14th centuries, was indeed a hotbed of intense, brutal, and long-lasting feuds between powerful noble families. The Montecchi and the Cappellati were not just poetic inventions, they were real families, and their disputes, while perhaps not specifically involving a specific love affair, in the same tragic sense as the play, exemplify how love, marriage, and honor were inextricably woven into the fabric of these devastating feuds. Medieval Italian cities were fiercely independent communes, dominated by powerful families known as magnates. These families lived in fortified tower houses, controlled vast retinues of armed men, and competed relentlessly for political power, economic dominance, and social prestige. Honor was paramount, and any perceived insult, whether to property, reputation, or family member, demanded swift and often violent retaliation. These feuds were not brief skirmishes. They were often generational, passed down from father to son, fueled by cycles of revenge and counter-revenge. The Montecchi, Montagues, were indeed a powerful Ghibelline family, known for their influence in Verona and other cities of the Veneto region. They were in fact one of the leading noble families in Verona in the 13th century, often at odds with the ruling Della Scala family, who were Guelphs. Their political alignment as Ghibellines meant they typically supported the Holy Roman Emperor against the Pope, and against families with Guelph sympathies. Cappellati, Capulets, while perhaps less prominent historically in Verona compared to the Montecchi, were also a noble family. Some historical sources place them in Cremona or other Lombard cities, but they were certainly part of the complex tapestry of Italian noble families. The idea of two rival families, one Guelph and one Ghibelline, was a common and dangerous reality across Italy. In this volatile environment, love and marriage were not separate from the feuds. They were deeply embedded within them. Marriages were primarily strategic tools. They were used to forge alliances, to consolidate power, to unite disparate factions, or to bring wealth and land into the family. A desirable marriage could strengthen a family immensely, while a broken betrothal, a perceived slight in a marital negotiation, or an inappropriate match could ignite or exacerbate a feud. Imagine a young woman from the Cappellati family, desired by a powerful Montecchi lord for his son. The negotiations might involve careful considerations of dowry, land, and future political advantage. If the Cappellati family decided to reject the Montecchi offer and instead marry their daughter into another rival family, perhaps one allied with the Guelphs, This rejection would not just be a business decision. It would be interpreted as a grave insult, a public declaration of antagonism, and a blow to the Montecchi family's honor and prestige. Such a refusal could lead to immediate acts of aggression, raids on property, or even assassinations. Conversely, imagine a scenario not unlike the fictional Romeo and Juliet, where a member of one family truly fell in love with someone from the opposing family. In the tightly knit, honor-bound society of medieval Verona, such a love would be not only forbidden but seen as a profound betrayal of one's lineage and loyalty. It would be a direct challenge to the very foundation of the family's identity, which was defined by its allies and its enemies. For a Capulet daughter to show affection for a Montague son would be an act of rebellion with severe consequences. Such a relationship, if discovered, could lead to disownment, imprisonment, or even death for the young lovers. It could also plunge the families into deeper conflict. The Montague family might see it as an attempt by the Capulets to infiltrate their ranks or dishonor their name through a scandalous affair. The Capulets might view their daughter's affections as a betrayal of their honor and an abandonment of their cause. The feuds themselves were fought with relentless intensity. Private armies of armed retainers roamed the streets. Assassinations were common, often carried out during religious processions or at public gatherings, ensuring maximum visibility and impact. Fortified family towers bristled with defenses, and their very existence was a statement of their power, and their readiness for conflict. Homes were often sacked and burned. Even churches and monasteries were not immune from the violence. Constant state of animosity in Verona impacted daily life. The ruling Della Scala family, the actual lords of Verona, struggled to maintain order, often using these feuds to their own advantage, playing one family against another to consolidate their own power. Dante Alighieri, the famed poet, who was himself a victim of a Guelph-Ghibelline feud in Florence, visited Verona and spoke of the city's divisions, mentioning the Montecchi and Capuletti in his Purgatorio, lamenting their suffering. This indicates that these families were indeed known figures of feuding in the Italian imagination. The real tragedy of these medieval feuds, mirrored in the fictional tale, was the suffocating grip they held on individual lives. Young people, particularly noble children, had little agency over their destinies. Their marriages were arranged for political and economic gain. Their loyalties were predetermined by birth. To deviate from these expectations, especially in matters of the heart, was to invite disaster not only for themselves, but potentially for their entire kin. A secret rendezvous, a whispered promise of love, or even a public display of affection between members of warring families would be an act of monumental defiance. Such an act would not only inflame the existing hatred, but add a deeply personal layer of betrayal and scandal to the already simmering pot. It would be a direct challenge to the authority of the patriarchs and the honor of the family name. The families would likely feel compelled to take extreme measures to reassert their control, punish the offenders, and restore their honor, leading to further violence and bloodshed. While no single historical document details a specific Romeo and Juliet love affair between a historical Montecchi and Capuletti that sparked their primary feud, the conditions were ripe for such tragedies. Constant, brutal, and often generations-long conflicts between powerful Italian noble families meant that personal affections, if they arose between opposing sides, would inevitably be crushed by the weight of inherited hatred, strict social codes, and the relentless demand for family loyalty. The fictional tale serves as a powerful metaphor for the devastating reality of these feuds, where passionate love often stood no chance against centuries of inherited animosity and the unyielding demands of family honor, leading to an inevitable bloody end for all involved. The very air of Verona in those centuries was thick with the tension of simmering grudges, and any spark, even one of love, could ignite a conflagration that would consume entire families.